Boys, another podcast. Just back to us three. How's everyone doing?
Good, bro.
Yeah, feeling good, man. I'm back.
Now, Scotty, you went to Perth over the weekend. How was that trip?
It was good, man, apart from the very, very early rise because we had a very early flight, but it was awesome. It was pouring rain when we left, and literally as soon as we got above the clouds, it was just beautiful. And even touching down in Perth, they have it so much better over there than we do, man, in terms of the weather, sun, the beach. It was amazing. And we were just talking offline before about the workshop itself. Obviously, I've downloaded you boys, but it was incredible. Like to go to a new state and to have the reception that we did in terms of how many people turned up and how much everyone loved it, and just seeing the standard of athletes over there, like the pedigree of natural physique bodybuilding in WA is well and truly alive. Like there was some incredible physique. Some of the guys there, one of the fitness guys in particular, which I think was he's coached by Jeremy, and he looked incredible, man. Like to be where he is at this far out, and some of the girls as well was amazing. But to catch up with some guys like Rich, who I went to uni with back in the day, Rich Collins, and also seeing some of the other coaches over there, the Morrison boys and Dill and everyone and Jeremy. It was just and Kat was there. Obviously Ainsley wasn't able to make it, but to just have such an awesome show up with so many, not just like so many numbers in terms of volume, but just so many good quality people. It was honestly above and beyond what we could have hoped for. It was really good.
That's awesome. And you're heading back there with MG for next time for the next workshop, aren't you?
I am, bro. Yeah, we're heading on September the 1st. So that'll be good as well, because there are a couple of people who actually weren't able to make this one here because we had a little bit of a last minute venue change. But a few of the boys that were there actually work at Canning Vale World Gym. And so they're like, the gym will definitely be ready by then. So it's going to be good to get back over there. Always a good excuse to get some good weather, bit of sunshine and catch up with everyone. So definitely looking forward to heading over there in 6 weeks' time and introducing MG to everyone and to see where everyone's at, because at that stage, we're 2 weeks out from our first show of the season, which it's hard to believe. Like, I feel like it's just yesterday that I was in the UK and, you're looking at the calendar, you're still this far out. And now, we really are getting towards the crunch time in the thick of winter, 7-8 weeks out from the show starting. It's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. MG, have you ever been to Perth? I've never been.
No, I haven't, man.
That's exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah, can't wait, man.
What about you, Scotty? Have you been before?
Yeah, so I went over there when I was a little bit younger with a few of my mates. We used to do a boys trip every year just to Perth. We used to stay in Scarborough, which is actually where we'll be staying because it's close to the venue and we go there. And it's beautiful. If I wasn't going to live in Melbourne, I'd live in Scarborough or I'd live in Broadbeach. It's just you walk outside, you've got the beach, everyone's into fitness, everyone's up early, coffee shops are up early. It's a very, I guess, an athletic / fitness oriented state. They take their fitness really serious. It's absolutely beautiful. Some of the best beaches in the world. Yeah, it's amazing, man. You guys are going to love it.
Sounds a lot better than Preston was this morning.
Do you know what was funny though? When I got off the plane, I messaged Rich and he's like, man, it's cold AF here this morning. I'm like, bro, it's like 15 degrees. And I'm like, we had like 3 degrees when we left Melbourne. And equally, even 3 degrees to me doesn't seem that cold anymore. But because they just have such beautiful weather all year round, they don't really know the cold or are acclimated to it. So, yeah, it's funny.
What was funny is when we went out for dinner the night before, so the Friday night, and we went out and we sat outside, and you're like, yeah, it's not like it's fine out here. It's not too bad. Granted, it was cold. It was nighttime, right, in Melbourne. And then when I got back in the car, Stewie's like, I was freezing. I was so cold. I was like someone from Queensland, mate. And a Melbourne nighttime sitting outside, just not going to go down well. But it'll be nice.
And just a shout out to the crew at Franco and Co. We know we eat there quite a bit, but unbelievable food there. It's Ruben, isn't it, MG?
Yeah, great guy. Yeah.
Great. The great man. He's also a big fan of the podcast, so we can give him a shout out. But unbelievable, good food, Italian-based food, but never disappoints. And what was that dessert you guys ordered? It was like the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. It was like it was on steroids.
It was just a sticky date pudding, but it was
a sticky date pudding that had been just it was made to be anabolic. This thing was like it barely fit on the plate.
Yeah, if anyone's looking for like something different, a new restaurant, that place in Eltham, Franco & Co, is absolutely epic. Absolutely epic. And it's if anyone's a celiac too, it's very gluten-free friendly.
This is true.
Definitely was. All right,
So
let's jump into some questions. We've got a fair few, especially coming off the back of the other podcast that we had last week, which was more NBA style or centric podcast. Got really, really good feedback on, all the announcements that we made and all the discussions that we had. But we do have people that absolutely love our normal Q&A potties that we mostly do. And we had someone that did ask, I love the podcast. I love the NBA podcast that you did have, but is your podcast going to be more NBA centric now that you're all directors, or will you go back to the Q&A? Like, we're definitely going to keep on the Q&A. I think out of 106, 107 episodes, we've done 2 NBA focused ones, and they're both for big announcements. One was when Scotty and I became directors, and the other one was when MG became a director and we had to announce some other things. But yeah, definitely going to be Q&A as the potty always is and always has been. So we're not going to be changing that. And actually, I'm super protective of the podcast. I know you guys know is I want to make sure that we keep it authentic and genuine and how we have been. And that's the reason why it's been so well received, is because we're just trying to give as much information as possible to educate people and really help. So we're definitely not changing the focus at all.
Yeah, and we'll use the podcast, to review also NBA shows, but, we review other federation shows as well. And I think ultimately when it comes to things like big announcements like last week, you're going to get the scoop here first before anywhere else. So, but it's definitely going to be the way that it always has been. We're going to stick to trying to answer as many of your questions as possible.
Yeah, and also too is, we're supporters of the whole industry and all the federations. We've had other people from other feds and other kind of competitors, even other coaches that we've interviewed. And I'm actually trying to organize an interview with an ICN judge. So that should be coming up in the near future. All right. The next one was something that we mentioned on the last podcast about China. And I know, MG, you brought up the point about us doing judging over there. And someone said, I thought you guys weren't going to be doing any judging. So I guess we're just going to clarify that, because that's a really, really good question. Is MG has actually done judging before. He judged the WHPH show. So it's not like he hasn't done any judging. But that one there specifically is the one in China is not an NBA show. We are going there to help them align with our criteria. So in future, we can have an affiliation and alignment with them. So there's no one better than us 4 directors to go there and help them judge, not being the sole judges, and make sure that their criteria is going to align with our criteria so that we can have a partnership together in the future. I don't know if MG, you want to clarify any of that?
Yeah, so basically, what the goal is there, and you got to think about the population of China. So, the show that we're going over to judge is, their first show they ran was, upwards of 150 competitors, and this show likely to be, 300 competitors. And ultimately what we're trying to do is align so that the pro standard that is selected on the day can then come and compete in our pro ranks. So the idea of us being there is that we show them exactly what our requirements are for each category, make sure that they align with our vision, and help them to choose, who are going to be the right pros that align with NBA. But if you look at the advertisement of the show, it's actually a super coach natural bodybuilding. That's what the federation's called for anyone who wants to look it up. It's SCNB in collaboration with NBA. Eventually that will be a formal partnership. But when anything's new in any new relationship, you want to make sure that, everything that you're putting out is consistent. We've always spoken about being consistent with NBA. And if we're going to affiliate with someone, we want to make sure that they're following that same path. So, for example, that our fitness pros and their fitness pros don't look completely different. The other thing that you have to think about with China is there's going to be a massive language barrier. So for the 4 of us who do not speak Chinese to go over and run a show with 300 athletes the way we do here, it's not going to work. So we're going to step into it first on the judging panel, assisting them with their decision making and showing them how we like to process things with an interpreter, with the view to step into a formal relationship in 2025.
Yeah, we're definitely trying to convince Stu to learn Chinese, at least say quarter turn to the right in Chinese when he does the call outs.
Could you? Yeah, actually, I would love to have Stu learn a couple of Chinese things just to say on stage. We've got to make that happen. Yeah, if we've got,
that'd be amazing. If you learn Mandarin.
If we've got any Chinese-speaking listeners that can send through a couple of things and maybe some voice recordings of some things that we can take over and have in our repertoire of language to be able to impress them, that would be very useful.
Bro, I'm one step ahead of you. I've already had a couple of my boys speak Chinese, and I've already got some terminology and some words that we're going to be able to
Awesome.
to be able to run.
Yeah, but
Especially
I
with
still think,
Stewie on the mic. I can't wait. We're going to have to get some clips of it because I feel like that is something that you just don't want to miss.
yeah. I mean, he'll hear this, so it's a giveaway. But I'd love to just kind of stitch him up a bit and have him say something that means absolutely nothing. You know?
Yeah, or something like I'm Stu O'Brien and I am the king of judging.
Yeah, I hope he's listening and laughing at the moment. But wouldn't it have been funny to like give him a sentence that he thinks he's saying, "Welcome to the show. We're so happy to be here," but it's actually like, "Oh my god, I forgot to feed my dog this morning."
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that trip. I've never been there, so it's gonna be really exciting.
Yeah, and I've shown you guys the videos of their last show, the caliber of not just the athlete, but the spectacle of what the show is with the stage, the seating, the LED lighting, the screens. It is absolutely phenomenal. So, to know that we're going to be a part of that and eventually be able to offer that as an option, from 2025 onwards for anyone who is looking to take their natural bodybuilding career international, we're going to be able to provide that in what's going to be an incredible environment.
And that's one of the things and one of the most important reasons why we are going over there to help judge is because if we're going to have international shows, we want it to be consistent with what we do here. One of our biggest things that we pride ourselves on is our consistency within our judging, not only nationally, but now it should be also internationally too. So we're going to make sure that we definitely are on top of that for sure. But we did have a question that came up about testing for international shows. So obviously we're running a Bali show. What will the testing be like of not only our athletes in Australia, but also those international athletes? So maybe, Scotty, you want to cover that. But after that, maybe, MG, you want to tell the people how they did the testing in China when they ran their show in season 8. So you go first, Scotty.
Yeah, so in terms of drug testing, like we don't have a set rule that you have to drug test only the overall winners. Anyone that we think or we deem that may not be potentially following the rules, we can drug test anyone. And it states that in the registration. So you're volunteering to be able to be drug tested. But obviously with what happened last time with that girl who, took a medal off someone who was cheating in Indonesia. And it is, it's prevalent that some of those athletes do use pharmacology and potentially claim to be natural. No different to there's athletes in Australia who do that too. But we definitely have drug testing that will be taking place. We're not going to be sparing any expense in the sense of if we think that someone needs to be tested, we will. But if we have 50 Indonesians doing the show, we're not necessarily going to test all 50 Indonesians, but any of the overall winners, even potentially any of the open class winners, we'll still be running drug tests on those as well. So, and for our pro divisions, we will endeavor to test all of our pro athletes, in particular those that are from a different nationality. I think it's one of those things, if we're testing some of our athletes that have done, say that they did the Melbourne show the week before, not the Melbourne show, sorry, the Brisbane show, the Nationals the week before, and they've done the pro show, and then they're heading over to Bali, and we've drug tested them, and we know they might have been drug tested at 2 or however many shows, then we may not necessarily need to test them again. Not to say that we won't, but again, we're not going to hold back. If we think that there is something or there's red flags, then by all means, we'll run as many tests as we need to. Because one thing that we're really big on, and this is also in China as well, and one thing that we really liked with Supercoach is that they're really, really big on ensuring that the quality of athletes, because there has been in previous times quite a large number of athletes who claim to perhaps be natural, but are obviously using exogenous compounds, and this federation, they don't want any of that in there, and so they're really set on vetting it, no different to how we are in Australia. So yeah, we will be running a very robust drug testing protocol. Again, we don't have the specifics in terms of who and how many, and equally we won't release that because we don't want to necessarily give anything away, but we will be ensuring that anyone that is potential to be cheating will be caught.
And MG, do you want to talk about what Supercoach did in season 8 from a testing perspective?
Yeah, well, when we first caught up with Supercoach, one of the first things that we had in our discussion, which our first meeting went for what was like 4 hours, right? It was grueling, was they wanted to know, hey, we're going to have a 300 competitor show. Can we test all 300? We want to test them the week of the show, and anyone that comes up positive isn't allowed to enter. So we worked through it. They had 137 athletes on their season 8 show, and they tested 137 athletes.
Wow.
2 days and 1 day prior to the show.
Wow.
So yeah, very, very strict, and that's kind of how we align with them. So what MT said is absolutely bang on. There will be a very big testing protocol for both our show, their show, and moving forward, testing just across natural bodybuilding for us will be leveled up big time.
And how did they do their testing? Because it was pretty surprising.
Blood draws.
Yeah, blood test, man.
Yeah, I could not believe that.
Blood test, man. Yeah, absolutely. I suppose in China, maybe the rulings are a little bit different. And, the consent to be able to perform a blood test is maybe a little bit easier than it is here. I don't know. But, yeah, they blood tested all athletes, which is pretty phenomenal, man. The biggest thing for them at the start was like, it's such an issue of pride. It's like, if you're going to compete in my natural show, you better bloody be a natural, right? Which is the way that it should be. But to the point where everyone has to be tested prior to the show so that if anyone isn't, they're not taking medals away from anyone. They're out before the show even starts, which in an ideal world, right, I'm saying it out loud, it sounds pretty good. Unfortunately, we don't have that capability here in Australia. We can't just get every athlete in for a blood test, but it's definitely happening on the other side of the globe. And it's something that, we're actively looking into is how can we test more people, but just so people also understand, because I think it's important. A lot of people having maybe not competed yet or only competed a few times, not understanding testing and getting tests completed and sent back to you isn't an easy task. It's very, very costly. It's very, very costly, to the point that if with certain companies and certainly within Australia, it costs as much to test an athlete as it does for an athlete to register for a show. So if you were to test every athlete, all the income that you're getting to run the show goes to testing, and there's no point running a show. So hopefully that puts it into perspective as to why federations are limited with testing. That being said, we're doing things behind the scenes to find alternative ways to be able to test way more people, which, we've advanced that and we've come up with something as well. But that's where it is difficult, is in that it is quite expensive. It does take time. The management process of those tests is difficult. And to be able to do the amount of tests it would take to get every athlete on the show, from a financial standpoint, how Australia works at the moment, there's no way to be able to do that.
Yeah, when I saw that video of them testing the athletes, and it was like a doctor's office, and
it was like 70 people in the line, right? It was the craziest thing you've ever seen.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah, I could not believe it.
And the funniest thing was that, and for all the listeners, like, you can envision this, right? It's like the foyer of an auditorium. Imagine a line of 70 athletes, and you've got the videographer literally running down the line while they're all lining up for their blood tests. Like, just not what you're used to seeing in a highlight reel of a bodybuilding competition.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah, I was very, very surprised. Yeah. All right, let's move on. So 2 longer-winded questions. They were both anonymous. I think they've come from the same person. So we'll start with the first one. Love how NBA is more aligned to the international standard for relevant categories. How do other feds vary with their categories? So let's kind of go through them, and I'll get you to chime in on this, Scotty, as we go through them. And I can talk about the female ones if you want to talk about the male ones. But, if we start at bodybuilding internationally and here, it's the same. Same type of posing. We're looking for all the same things. So I guess we can say that mostly all feds that I know of, natural feds in Australia, align with the international standard of bodybuilding. The next one down would be classic physique. So classic physique internationally and within Australian federations does vary a little bit, but you probably know better than what I do, Scotty. So I don't know if you want to talk about, obviously you can talk a lot about NBA, but also talk about what you know of, let's call it the other big fed, ICN, and maybe one of the other smaller feds like A and B.
Yeah, so I think classic is one of those divisions, kind of like wellness, where in the last classic's been around for a little longer than wellness, but wellness is definitely, it reminds me of when classic first sort of popped onto the scene and it really exploded. And I feel like it has in the female divisions in terms of how many athletes want to do that, because we'll stick with classic for now. But so classic, typically we at NBA obviously prefer, I guess you could say we're similar to that sort of NPC in terms of how we like our look. Yes, you need to have a classic physique. You need to have the legs, you need to have the upper body. But again, there's a significant difference. You can have a great set of legs and a great upper body, and you may be phenomenal in bodybuilding, but you may not fit the mold in classic because you need to have that shape. And unfortunately, within bodybuilding, genetics and one's anthropometry play a big part in terms of the aesthetics of our physiques. But we definitely reward a refined look. You definitely need to be conditioned. I know with ICN, for the most part, they usually will reward condition, although there have been previous times where perhaps the most conditioned athlete who still has size is not always rewarded, but you're always going to get some subjectivity. But if we use the example of the nationals that's just gone, which was in New South Wales, wasn't it? MT, you were there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you see that classic lineup?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the gentleman that won that, I actually caught up with him. He was in WA, Tom Glassford, incredible physique. So unfortunately, he was all covered up with a workshop. Would have loved to see where he's at the moment post show. But in terms of the look, like for me, they just nailed it. He was classic 101. In terms of the guy who I think he beat Jack Radford, who actually won the bodybuilding overall, which I also really liked that they had some distinguish between this is bodybuilding and this is classic. And condition, great legs, great symmetry, upper body was fantastic. And that is the look that we're looking for in NBA. And typically that is usually what, when I'm prepping my athletes, ICN would look for. I guess one of the differences in, say, maybe one of the smaller feds, say, I think you said A and B, they obviously released their post saying that if you're too conditioned, you're not going to fit their mold. They like their look a little bit softer, which is probably a little bit different. Equally, everyone has their choice in terms of, the criteria that they're going to uphold in terms of the look they like. Unfortunately for people like me, who my athletes, I tend to push and play the conditioning card. We've actually had to pull a couple of our guys from that show just because as soon as that came out, they messaged me like, what are we going to do? And so it's one of those things where, originally, some athletes that have done that show before from a conditioning perspective have placed okay, but some of the guys that I have this season in classic, conditioning wise, they're well and truly ahead of the game, and they're going to be of an elite standard. And so they just don't fit that mold. So, it's one of those things where we had to make that call. We literally made it yesterday that we decided we'll either have a week off or maybe do another show. But yeah, that's basically the main difference, man. So like I said, we prefer, and we are very particular about that look. No different to how IFBB would judge it, and I guess to most of the time, ICN as well.
So you would say that internationally, the standard for conditioning would be a leaner look, like a bodybuilding look?
Yeah, I think in the men's divisions, full stop now, like the way that I explain it to my fitness guys as well as my physique guys, any of your body that is being displayed, it needs to be at the highest level of conditioning. Like if you're in men's physique, to some extent, you still need to, like, your glutes might still be in because you can't obviously control spot reduction in terms of where we're going to, lose adiposity, but calves need to be shredded. You need to be tight through the midsection in classic. Everything that is being displayed, you need to be as conditioned as you can without obviously compromising, losing fat-free mass. And this is the trade-off where when you have one's physique, sometimes, and this is where there'll always be a line, you could be robbing Peter to pay Paul. If I have someone who's got an abundance of muscle and we're pushing to have elite top-end conditioning, we can afford to sacrifice perhaps losing a little bit of that skeletal tissue in the chase to take conditioning. But if you have someone like, if we use, say, Timsy, for example, who's in phenomenal conditioning, we've had to tread, and we will tread very carefully because he doesn't have an abundance of size. He's still a young man. He's still growing into his body. So you obviously have to tread a little bit more carefully, and you need to allow a little bit more time. So I think for the most part, internationally, the standard for all of the men's divisions is, you need to get as conditioned as you can without compromising loss of fat-free mass.
Awesome. Okay, let's move to the next one. You talked about men's physique. Again, that's another division that is done internationally. I guess let's cover that one a little bit. All I know the differences clearly is internationally, there's no muscularity round for men's physique. And that's what we do in NBA to obviously align that internationally. But the other feds in Australia, the natty feds, they do a muscularity round. So that's the clear difference I see. for us aligning to the international standard. Do you see any other differences within conditioning, muscularity, those kind of things?
No, I think conditioning is pretty consistent for the most part. Again, if we look at, say, MPC, like IFBB, they do half turns, so we do quarter turns. But obviously ICN have the muscularity round where you have the front double, rear double, side chest, side tricep. And I think, in fact, I don't actually know. I can't speak for YNF. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd just be spitballing. But I think that they do. But again, I can't confirm that. But ICN obviously have their muscularity round. But internationally, I think, again, originally I was pushing, and you can attest to this. We were both sort of pushing Stewie. We wanted the muscularity round, and that was mainly because as an ICN physique competitor, that was all that I had known, and so I think it was only really when, like, I straight up was just like, "What's your rationale behind why?" And when he sort of explained it and broke it down, and I literally went away and, as I tend to do, let it marinate and looked at it, objectively, I could be like, you know what, it definitely makes sense. And so I think that I like that. It also standardizes it. And one of the main reasons is it prevents us getting bodybuilders in board shorts, which unfortunately we do tend to see sometimes. And that's something that I think is great and I've noticed it within IFBB Pro League over here in Oz. They have started to change and not necessarily reward, if you're gigantic and you don't fit the mold, they'll say you need to go and do bodybuilding or classic, versus you still need to have a lot of size, but they are still definitely rewarding conditioning. And I saw that personally firsthand in the show that I did. I was by no means the biggest guy on that stage, but I was still able to be somewhat competitive. So I think they're probably the biggest things. But in terms of the conditioning standards, I don't think that there's too much of a discrepancy. As I said, I think that whatever's being displayed, that body part or that area of your body needs to be conditioned to the best of your ability.
Okay, next one down is men's fitness, which is not an international division, but it's something that we do in Australia, so we won't even cover that one.
Yep.
The next one, from a female perspective, would be figure. Internationally, figure just have turns, no muscularity. And we do have figure international, which is just turns, no muscularity. We also have figure, which has both. And I believe the other feds have that too. I know ICN, I believe they have the two separate divisions.
They do.
Yep. And so, I think that majority of the feds are aligned with the international standard there from a figure perspective. The next one is fitness, which is not an international division, so we'll skip that one. The next one is wellness, which I think we've spoken about a fair bit, to do with how we align with what it is internationally. And then obviously sports is just an Australian thing. It's not an international thing. And then we've got bikini. And I think we've spoken a fair bit about that, how we've aligned to that internationally. But the other feds are still keeping the, let's call it the Australian vibe to it. Yeah. So I think we covered all that off. But if anyone else has any questions regarding that, and they want to know even state by state, because state by state it can change for some federations if the judging isn't the same, or don't have the head judge the same across them. And that leads me to the next question, which I believe it was the same person because the way it's worded is very, very similar. They said they listened to a podcast where the ICN WA president mentioned there's no national judging consistency, how each state interprets a criteria differently based on the culture of their state. Gave bikini as an example. How are you supposed to know what each state likes, and then what will be awarded at nationals? Did you see that potty or a clip of that potty?
Yeah, I actually spoke to Dill. So that was Dill Tran from WA. So he does that potty with, I forget the name, it's one of his mates. And I think it kind of did the rounds because a lot of us probably have known that for a while, but also sort of. But he obviously asked some phenomenal questions, and then one of them obviously was there any kind of alliance or a gathering of states to decide on standardization? And unfortunately, that they don't have that. Not to say that maybe they won't one day, because I'm sure there are some people that are pushing for it. But I think there definitely is a lot of people that, especially in that bikini division, where it is a little bit tricky, depending on which state you go to in terms of knowing where you'll place them. Even in some of the other divisions, like with, female fitness can be a tricky one. We saw that in season A. Men's fitness, I found over my time, is different because some of the states do some muscularity posing versus we in Victoria don't do that. So like I've had guys on stage in their rear shots and other athletes are doing a rear double bicep and my guys are just hitting their relaxed pose. So I think that can make it challenging sometimes when you don't necessarily know, what is right, what is wrong, because there's just so much just uncertainty that hasn't been clarified. But I think within most states, you probably have an idea. Where it gets tricky is when you go to a national show and you sort of put it all on the line, and essentially it can just be a free swing because you just don't really know where it's going to land.
Yeah, definitely. I know that I got sent a screen grab of the workshop they did in WA, and they had the criteria for wellness up on the screen, and the criteria was written different to the way it was written on the website, especially the conditioning component. So I know we've spoken about this before, how the criteria written on the website and what's been public is that there must be enough body fat to not have muscle separation between the groups. But on the screen, when they were presenting it at a workshop, it said you must be able to see separation. So it was the complete opposite. So, which makes it confusing, because then what do you see then at a national title, which makes it very difficult for some people.
And that's what I mean, that ambiguity between state to state and equally as an athlete. Like for me, and to be honest, full transparency, it's one of the reasons, like I have people ask all the time, why don't you work with bikini competitors? And for me, it's because the criteria for me, as someone who's very particular about how I do things, I think that I would just get too frustrated. And for a little bit there, I did, just not really knowing, is it this or is it that? And so I just, that was that full transparency, that was one of the main reasons why I don't work with bikini competitors. Everyone thinks it's because I don't like the division. I actually don't. I have a lot of respect for it and I love it. It's not the case at all, but it is really, really tricky. Like I admire you boys for being able to do that and to have success in those divisions. But equally, I think you really have to know your state and do your due diligence before you obviously go there for wherever that national show is.
Yeah. How do you think, MG? I know it can be difficult sometimes to know what to do in a state, and then when they go to nationals for the federation, what to do there.
But it is difficult. I've had, some instances in the past where, may have had a really, really good result in Victoria, gone to nationals and had not the same result, and a different look was rewarded. I think the thing that I've learned is, and Scotty touched on it, is know your state, know what you're looking for, and if you are going to go into a national show, maybe take some time with your coach to investigate what was successful at the state show in that state, and then if there's something that potentially you need to adjust, because sometimes it's not even a physique thing, it's literally a posing thing. Even just the way you're standing, whether you're side on or front on. If we're talking about bikini specifically, we go back to nationals a couple of years ago in Brisbane. Front pose in a bikini shot versus that sort of front presented side pose was being not marked up well. So having a little bit of insight can help. But I think for the most part, for a lot of people, if your plan is that you're only going to do a state show in your state and you don't really have any plans to do anything else, it probably doesn't matter too much from a federation standpoint. I think it's a bit of a problem there to know that you can't achieve consistency, and then to verbalize it and also have conflicting information from, say, what you're presenting to your state versus what's up on your national website. So I can see how that would be confusing for a lot of competitors. I also can sympathize with an ICN state president who might want to make things consistent but can't agree with other states. I can see how difficult that would be. I don't know what the answer is for them to rectify that. I do think that it's something that they need to, and probably are having lots of discussions about, because I think it's starting now to filter down to the competitor level. Coaches have been talking about it in terms of the inconsistency state to state. Now it's starting to filter down where athletes are having a lot of discussions about it. So I hope that it can be rectified, one, so that, we know as coaches what we need to present in each state. But I see they have a big task ahead of them, because, you're talking about, in reality, 7 franchises all trying to achieve the same thing, which can be very, very difficult.
Yeah, and we're not saying there's anything wrong with all of this. Like, sometimes it's good to have variety. It's good that we're all different. We don't want to have all the federations be exactly the same, so then people can pick and choose what they want to do, what they like, what they dislike. If they like a specific fed in a specific state and they like that look and they like the way the show's run and it's judged, then they stick to that. They know what it is and they'll enjoy doing that, and that's their place to be. Whereas others like different things, and that's the beauty about having different federations. And I know we've spoken a lot about categories and standards and the differences, but we're not saying any of it's wrong. it's good sometimes that there's some variety. We're just obviously just answering the questions based on, what we're getting filtered through to us, and to make sure that we're trying to be as consistent, but also telling people that it's okay. Like, we're not saying there's anything wrong with it, and we're supporters of all feds in all states. So
like we said earlier, and again, as an example, like I was using the example between bodybuilding and classic, I thought that separation and the way they did that was fantastic. And there's times where fitness athletes who are maybe on the fringe, they'll make a call and say, this is in the men's divisions, maybe they're closer to fitness and not physique. And again, they'll make those hard calls. But like in anything, there's always going to be some gray areas, and I'm sure over time it'll get ironed out. But I think bikini will just always be one of those ones, just subjectively, that there's just so much nuance to it in terms of, and a lot of times as well, it will depend on what you get on the day in terms of who turns up.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've said this to you once. I think one of the easiest divisions to maybe judge or prep for is men's physique. I would say in NBA, when there's no muscularity, because you've just got your quarter turns and you know exactly what they're looking for. They're only looking at most of the top half of your body. Like, how more succinct can you get of what they're going to be judging for? Whereas you go into bodybuilding or classic, and there's so much more that goes into the criteria. And then you go into bikini, where it's not about the muscularity per se, it's about the look and the shape, right? So it can be difficult, and that's why the judge's job is really, really hard sometimes.
And also, I think as a coach and as an athlete, like we were saying before, you have to weigh up, with every action, there's going to be an opposing reaction, if you will. So if you think about, if I decide to push further for conditioning, on the opposite side of that, maybe I give up some tissue. And so it's knowing your athlete and deciding, can we afford to push a bit harder and chase that, elite standard of conditioning? If it means that we lose a little bit of size, obviously you never intend to lose it, but unfortunately the cost of prolonged period of energy deprivation, there's always going to be some reduction in fat-free mass at some stage. But it's just a matter of, again, knowing, are you better off to come in a bit fuller versus are you better to just come in razor sharp? And so sometimes you don't know until you run it, and then you'll see your result, you get the judge's feedback. And that's another reason why we advocate, you should, within your feds, you should do multiple shows so that you can get that feedback and see which look suits better. And that's something that you hear maybe not so much of in natural bodybuilding, but I feel like those that listen to IFBB, you hear that a lot versus, we are. And one of the guys that I have noticed a lot when he lists his peaking strategies is Dean from Flex Success. So he will give an example of when they've pushed for fullness versus if they're pushed for conditioning. And again, to some extent, it's getting an idea of putting you in front of the judges. What do they prefer, the aesthetics of your look, given that it's bespoke to you, your anthropometry? You look better when you're a bit fuller, or versus maybe you look better when you're a little bit flatter, but you're just razor sharp. And so they're the decisions. And this is why obviously you employ a coach to help make that decision. Do we go down this path and turn right, or do we go down that path and turn left? And I think as your season unfolds, the look that you're chasing gets better and better, because you get a better idea of the best and most optimal peaking strategy to bring the best look. Not necessarily the most conditioned, but it's that balance between that fullness and conditioning, which is what you need, to be honest, in pretty much all of the divisions, with the exception of potentially bikini. Bearing in mind that we've spoken about wellness now is basically, it is a high conditioned level standard, but you've got to have big legs.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be how you would summarize it, MT?
For wellness?
Yeah. Would you say that you're basically looking at the same level of conditioning as fitness,
mm-hmm.
but you've got bigger legs?
Yep. Bigger legs, bigger glutes. Yep. Bigger lower body, more dominant.
That's exactly right. So everything from below the waist is bigger, and that's how I explain it. So yeah.
I think you touched on a good point. It is essentially what we discussed in the last potty that IFBB competitors do a lot of, is they like that fed, they stick to that fed, therefore they do multiple state shows in that fed so they can continue to get feedback and refine their look, so that when they go to the next state or when they go to the nationals, they improve their placing and they improve their look. And that's something that we discussed, the reason for our incentive to get people to do multiple state shows in the one fed. If you like that one fed and you're going to stick to that one fed, we want to give you an incentive to do that, so you can continue to refine your look and improve and potentially work your way up to better placings as you go to different states and as you even go to nationals too.
Yep.
All right, I want to go to the next one. And we actually had a chat about this during our most recent meeting. So what boundaries should posing coaches who are also show judges make when they are taking on prep clients who specifically swap to that coach because they have a perceived influence on the federation? So I know we had this discussion about we're trying to obviously find the right judges for the right states and bring people on board who we think are the best fit. And it's difficult because some of the best judges are also posing coaches and prep coaches. So it's difficult to put someone in a judging position that won't have any conflict or interest in who's competing on that day. And also, too, is yes, there might be some people out there that think there's a perceived influence and they'll go, well, I'm going to start posing with that person. I'm going to go and be their prep client because I might get a leg up. So I don't know, Scotty, maybe you want to talk about some of the decisions that we're making. We won't say who they are, but how we're finding people in a specific state, but we're actually going to make them judge in a different state.
Yeah, so we have some judges that we hopefully should have locked down, hopefully by the end of this week, that are phenomenal posing coaches, great judges, but equally, one of our biggest things is we can't have any conflict in any state. So, one of the things that we do at NBA is we actually fly our judges around just so that we have that standardization. There'll always be Stewie plus one or two fly in, and looking at topping up some of those states where we're new to arrive at to bring some of those experienced judges over to there. But equally, we need some local judges. And if we think that they're good and they fit the mold, obviously they may not fit that given state because there's a conflict, but we may be able to bring them to South Australia or to Victoria. And then even if maybe they have one or two clients there, if they do, then it's easy. They can just step off the table. But it's more if they've got 3, 4, 10, 12, it's a different story. And so we don't engage in that. But it's one thing to say easy, they step off the table. But when you're talking about if there's multiple athletes, from our perspective, logistically, we can't have judges constantly off the table because we don't have enough people to judge the show. So they're all things that we factor in. But I think it's important to have some separation between the two. And that's something that we're really, really big on. And equally, that was something that we knew instantly that Stewie, all of our 4 values align synergistically with that he sees it exactly how we see it. And so that was it was very, very easy, clear, transparent. And equally, that's how it's communicated to anyone else. If someone expressed interest and they were a coach or they were a judge, equally, we have some fantastic judges in Queensland who is also phenomenal in their craft as physique prep coaches. But equally, there's never any issues there because they'll judge states where they don't have athletes, or if they do have 1 or 2, for example, they just jump off the table and they're not even within the vicinity. And again, not that it would be an issue because we know the integrity of the people that we work with, but just so that there's no blurred lines and there's no, but this person was here when their athlete was on, we don't have any of that. And so that's something that we're really, really big on. Doesn't matter how big as a fed it gets. It's something that we're all in agreement with because it's something that it should be. As it is, bodybuilding's, an extremely subjective sport. So we try and eliminate any potential for bias. But yeah, that's how we do it.
Yeah, you raised a couple of good points there. One is, those judges stepping off the table. It's literally removing yourself and walking away from the table, not just sitting there and not, putting pen to paper. And
I'll go backstage.
Yeah, you literally have to remove yourself completely from the table, not even in line of sight of the judges, can't hear what they're saying, can't influence them at all. You need to completely leave and walk away. And the funny thing is about the perceived influence, I think we've had this discussion when they removed a judge in a Victorian federation because they thought there was a perceived influence. And we spoke about how you would have to not buy off one judge, you'd have to buy off nearly all of them or the majority, and how would be absolutely silly to think that you need to go with a posing coach or you need to go with a prep coach because they're also a judge and you think that you're going to win everything, because it's not as easy as that. Even if you, for whatever reason, bought off or got influence over one judge, doesn't mean it's going to affect your placings. You need to get the majority to rule you in that direction, in that placing.
And I think for them, people underestimate, people that are taking the time to judge, and for a lot of the time, some of them may not even be remunerated. They have no desire to try and cross lines. Again, you're talking about questioning one's integrity. And as you said, one person on a panel is not going to be able to sway the other 5 or 6 judges. And we've seen that with certain judges being removed, and yet that same season or the next season, their same posing clients kill it and they win overalls and they do well. because it speaks to them as a coach, as opposing coach, in terms of what they do, rather than people just pissing and moaning because they didn't place well and they blame it on this person worked with her or with that person. So I think we're at a stage now where we know better.
Yeah. Okay. The next question we got was, do we have a plan to go to 2-day shows to prevent shows going over time? So MG, maybe you want to talk about it a little bit, but we do a 2-day show for our season spring nationals, but in our season autumn nationals, we only do a 1-day show. But we haven't actually spoken about whether, if the shows get so big, we'll need to do 2-day shows for all the seasons.
Yeah, I think if we take a look at our last show, we always sit down post show and be like, all right, what was great, what wasn't great, and we want to dissect it and make sure that it's the best that it can possibly be. From our point of view, one of the things that we identified was, within the way that we coordinate the day and the time that we give to, athletes, coaches, to have their own individual time, that we probably allowed a few things to go a little bit too long. So the first thing that we do before we go and look at, hey, let's add another day, is there some things we think we can do within that 1-day show to improve not just the speed of it, but keep the quality? And there was a few things that we picked out in terms of the way that we MC it, the way that we bring people up on stage, certain moments that we can, bring together and make one to create some more time. I think ultimately, when we look at the plans that we have for certainly, NBA as a federation over the next 12 to 18 months, it's definitely a possibility. And ultimately, if we feel like it's going to run to a point that's getting a little bit too late and we don't want athletes peaking for 9 p.m., we will run a second day. It's pretty obvious that adding a second day significantly increases the cost of the show, which is something that, directors and people who run all federations need to consider. But there's definitely a point at which you do need to go to a second day. What that number is obviously dependent on the federation, but it is something that all federations are looking at. But first and foremost, it's about going back and having a look at all the things that you did that you could have done a little bit better. And if you feel like you can create that same experience in 1 day, you'll keep 1 day. And if you need a second, then there'll be a second. But yes, we haven't had a discussion yet. There will be some discussions post this season, which is already a 2-day show anyway. If we get through this nationals this year, and the 2-day worked really, really well, and we felt like it was better received, then it's definitely something we'll consider for autumn next year.
All right, next question, a little bit more of a fun one. Who is your favorite stage wear designer and why? MG?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't think that we've ever been asked anything like that before. Look, we've got some incredible stage wear designers in Australia. What comes to mind for me is, I recently judged at that WHPH show. Mm-hmm. So Coco Australia designed a lot of the swimsuit stagewear for that day. And I think in that division, there might have been upwards of 10, maybe a dozen competitors. And I would say that 95% of them were done by Coco. And they were freaking phenomenal, man. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. A little bit of a step away from the typical bikini being swimsuit, but these swimsuits were absolutely elite. But I think we're pretty fortunate in Australia to have some amazing creative designers within our industry. I'm yet to go to a show and see a bikini or a stagewear outfit that I've been like, that sucks. that pretty much sums it up.
Swimsuit's one of those things where people think it's too hard, or I don't even know where to start, or I don't even know where to get one, or how to get it made. But swimsuit is such a big category, especially in NBA, knowing that it's standalone category and it does have a pro card. And the way we work our pro card system is, once you're a pro, you're then in that league. So then, if you get your swimsuit pro card, you're now a pro athlete for NBA. Doesn't mean you're a swimsuit pro, you are now a pro. So you can work your way up to bikini, to sports, to fitness, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a really, really good division, but I think people kind of are a bit wary about and get confused about, like, what do I do with the swimsuit? Like, how do I get one? How does this all work? And, there's many great designers, but Coco is one of those too. So definitely reach out to her if you're looking for one. But obviously, again, have a look around. There's a lot of different designers too. But I think swimsuit is one of those ones that feel a little bit daunting for people, because they're all used to just going to their bikini company that they like and getting their bikini made. But some of these bikini companies don't make swimsuits. So, you could go to a company that does both if you're going to do both, and maybe get a deal. So have a little bit of a think about that too. All right, let's finish on this one. Should you compete if you don't have the right genetics? How much does it play a part in bodybuilding? I'll get you to tackle this one, Scotty, but I think your answer is going to be very, very similar to what I would be thinking is, should you compete? Yes, you should always compete. If that's a goal of yours, you should compete no matter what your genetics are, what your background is, right? It's your expectation of maybe how competitive you'll be may be different. So what do you think?
100%. I think some people genetically are going to be more blessed with better insertions and origins, and their anthropometry might be, just built for a certain division. Like we speak about classic, it just has that look. But I think that there are things that you can do in terms of training and nutrition to supersede what your genetics give you. I know some phenomenal physique athletes who don't have the best genetics, but they're able to still build a pretty decent physique. Like obviously, if you're taller, you have longer limbs, and your insertions, not as ideal as say someone who's short, has shorter limbs, and they have those nice round muscle bellies. Is it going to be as easy for you to achieve crazy aesthetics perhaps as someone else? No, it may not be as easy, but just because it's not easy doesn't mean it can't be done. I think there's something to be said for refusing to just say something's too hard. I think that's just maybe the way that I view anything in life. And I always think about this, if my son was to come to me or my daughter and say, I want to do this, but it's too hard. I'm like, well, okay, rather than you're looking at the end destination where you need to get to, compartmentalize it and break it into different stages. And all right, maybe you're a 60 kilo, 5'10" male, and you've never lifted weights and you want to look like Chris Bumstead. Is it realistic for you to look like him? Maybe not. But if you give yourself 3, 4, 5 years of eating the right amount of food, training hard, sleeping, just focusing on being just a little bit better each day than you were the one prior, all of those deposits over time, they compound. And then before you know it, bang, you've built a physique. It's like the task, I want to buy a house and I need to save $200,000 for a deposit to do that. And you've just started working full time. You get your first paycheck and maybe it's $1,000. You're a long way away from where you need to be. But if you're disciplined, you work hard, you save your money, you let it compound over time, maybe in 5 or 6 years, you have that deposit that you want and you go and buy that house. I think it literally is as black and white as that in this space. And I think the other thing is now we know that it really isn't that hard. Just eat a little bit more food. Make sure you have at least 3 to 5 decent protein feedings. Train a little bit harder than you did the last time you went to the gym, and sleep as much as you can. And then do that on repeat for a long period of time. And you'll be amazed at what you can achieve with consistency over time.
What do you think, MG?
Man, if all of our bodybuilding shows for every federation in the whole country was only had the stage filled with people who are genetically blessed, we'd have empty shows, man. And if you've ever been to a bodybuilding show and been impressed, let me tell you, only 5% of those people on stage are probably in that category. So you can achieve great things even with terrible genetics if you're patient and you're consistent. Yes, you should always compete.
Yeah, I think some of this also comes from people comparing themselves to others and thinking that they can never achieve what that person's achieved. Maybe that person is not genetically gifted, but they just worked really, really hard. And you're just assuming that they're genetically blessed and they're maybe not. So nothing is impossible and you just need to really put the work in and give yourself time.
And you should never compare your day one to someone's 2000 for all you know, because you haven't seen the hours cooking, the sleeping, the training, what it took to build that. You just think, oh, they're just blessed. But equally, I think it's almost a little bit naive to think in that sense. Most of the time, I would say at least 90% of the time, most of the people that have those crazy physiques, they've earned it. They haven't just been gifted it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I think it's a good one to leave it on. It was awesome to have a chat, catch up, answer some really, really good questions too. Can't wait for next week to answer some more questions, so definitely keep them coming.
Sounds good, boys. MG, look after that tibialis anterior.
Yes, man. I will. I've had some troubles, but I will do my best.
My man.
All right, see you guys.